War is hell. General William Tecumseh Sherman. 27. It was really strange. There was this older guy sitting alone. He wasn't even the type I look for. He looked really depressed. He was sitting, just staring into his beer. He was beyond bald. He looked kind of sickly, too. I hadn't seen him around town before, so I thought he was a transient. That's why I did it. I figured I'd pick him up, take him to a room, give him the treatment, and screw. I sat down at the table with him and made some small talk. He wasn't very talkative. He looked so sad and alone there that I decided to try and cheer him up. I know I was out of character. You know? I've been out of character a lot since we rescued Fred. Anyway, I tried to cheer him up. He seemed to suck the happiness right out of the room. I didn't like that. Nobody should be that sad or that alone. He didn't want to tell me what was bothering him, and I really didn't want to pry, so I tried to make a pass at him. He grinned a little and said it was nice to know that the still had a little left. I asked him a little of what, and he said, "Oh, never mind." We sat there, not saying much for a while, and he bought me a drink. He said it was really nice to have some company for a change, even if it was a young stranger in a bar. He asked me if I was Vietnamese. I was surprised. Most of the people around here mistake me for Chinese or Korean. I said yes. He asked me if I was born there, and I said no. He asked me where my parents were from. I said Saigon. He said I looked like someone he knew a long time ago in Hue. I told him I had relatives there. He told me about a woman there that he loved, but had to leave behind because of the war. He looked so sad when he told me about her. He said she was just about my age when he knew her, and had things been different, he would have brought her home with him. He looked so sad. We sat there for a long time just sort of being together. He sipped his beer and stared at me. He had sort of a haunted look in his eyes like he was reliving a memory. Finally, I asked him about the woman in Hue. He was quiet for a long time. He got kind of pale, if he could really do such a thing, as he was about as pale as a man could be already. He told me about a botched rescue mission on the Mekong. He lost some dear friends, and when he got back to Hugh, she was gone. He asked around, because he really cared about her. After a lot of questions to anyone who might know, he discovered that she was involved in the ambush and was killed. The Viet Cong considered her a hero. He asked how she died, and he was told that she was hit with machine gun fire. He started to cry. I held his hand and said, "Hey, that was at least 30 years ago." He said that he relives it regularly, more so now, that his wife has died. What happened then? I took his hand and held it and told him that I understood. He told me that nobody could understand because it was only now that he understood the lesson in that. He said that in war, there are things that are too ugly to understand until age forces a person to examine them for what they are. He said that war is a young person's game, organized by greedy people to achieve selfish ends. He also said that the hurt from war never really goes away. It just gets passed on to the next generation. I started to cry. I thought about the hardships my parents went through before they came to America and the reception they got when they came here, and how I was teased long after the war was over. I thought about how the hurt colored my relationships with other people and the other people's relationships with me. It was such a crushing load. Images flashed through my mind as I considered what he said. My heart filled with love for this man and a desire to heal his pain. There was nothing I learned in nursing school that could help him. I knew that instinctively. He needed love and reassurance. He didn't need any more kind words, but kind actions could help. Suddenly, the bar just wasn't the right place for us anymore. I suggested that we retire to my hotel room. He was hesitant, but he too felt that a bar was no place to be vulnerable for too long a time. He was feeling vulnerable. I could see it. He was so alone. I could feel it in him. He needed a woman to hold him and love him. He needed me because I looked like someone from his past that he loved and lost. I couldn't refuse. We left the bar and went to my room. That doesn't seem very strange to me. It got strange in the hotel room. How? Prior to my home, it was such a crush. We sat around and talked some more. It seems that he lives here in town too. It's funny, we met in Nashville, but we live just a few miles apart. He seemed so depressed and so tense. I got him onto the bed and gave him a back rub. He enjoyed it. He talked about how his wife gave him back rubs when he came back from business trips. He said he really missed them. We started to snuggle and make out. He seemed hesitant, even a bit nervous, but I chalked it up to his being somewhat newly widowed and tried to get him hot and bothered. Finally, he overcame his reluctance and started responding to me. He undid my bra. I undid his belt and reached into his pants. I grabbed him gently to stir him up. That's when it got weird. How did it get so weird? When I got hold of his manhood, it came off in my hand. You mean he came? No, everything came off. It was plugged in with a plastic tube going up inside of him. He had a vagina just like ours. I threw it on the bed and screamed. Then I threw up. With all the things I've gone through, I never got hysterical before. I got hysterical. It took him a long time to reassure me that he was born and continued to function as a man, but he neglected prostate cancer, and the surgery left him that way. He said that he lost his manhood and his wife the same day. He said he tried to warn me, but what happened then? He told me about his cancer. That night was the first time since he started his treatments that he felt halfway human. He had cabin fever and had to get out. Because this is a dry county, he went to Nashville, where there were anonymous bars that sold real drinks. I had to choose that bar. I would really like to meet him. That will happen soon. I promised I'd find him some pot to ease his cancer therapy. I have to find Jack first. He can usually come up with anything I want. I have his number, so when I get some pot, he'll come over to get it. I know you'll like him. He probably has kids our age. Yeah, probably, but it's better to be an old man's lover than to be a young man's punching bag. 28. Benny lay retching on the sofa. There was a box of unsalted soda crackers and a pitcher of water on the coffee table and a 5-gallon plastic bucket on the floor. Yesterday was chemo day. Today life would suck. His brain felt too big for his skull, and his stomach was trying its best to expel last Thanksgiving's turkey. He sat in his bathrobe and Miranda's cotton panties and fought with the morning crossword puzzle. The new washer hadn't come, and he was out of clean laundry. There were no clean towels, no clean sheets, and no clean underwear, except for Miranda's. He hesitated and agonized a lot, trying to decide whether to do it or not. He felt like a cross-dresser, just handling them with the idea of actually putting them on. 56 years of habit resisted the idea. During his childhood, he wore briefs. When he joined the Navy, he started wearing boxers. The idea of wearing women's lingerie never occurred to him. Until now, he slipped them on, and they fit better than his boxers. He looked at himself and muttered, well, there's no turning back. He pulled on his robe and went downstairs. That was where the chemotherapy caught up with him. By the time he rounded up the bucket and filled the water pitcher, he was sweating heavily and his stomach was in full revolt. He rested in the living room doorway for a couple of minutes to focus his eyes and stumbled to the front door to get the newspaper. He made a mental note to give the paper boy a large tip as the paper was within easy reach on the front porch. He staggered to the couch and heaved into the bucket. Nothing came out except a little bit of mucus. He took a drink of water and heaved it back out. It took half a stack of crackers to stop his stomach's contortions, and he was glad that he hadn't thrown up blood. He was dizzy and spent from his exertions, and now he had a headache to go with all his other problems. It was hot. He forgot how hot the southern edge of Tennessee could get. The air conditioning system was out of service for lack of maintenance. It simply made the house hotter. He was in no condition to deal with people or machinery. Even if he was well, he couldn't fix it because he had neither the tools nor the knowledge to troubleshoot a modern central air system with total climate control. Hell, he couldn't legally buy refrigerant. The only way he kept track of time was by the cycle of his chemotherapy. When he started to feel well again, it meant that he had to go to the medical center and get his shot again. He didn't even know for sure how many doses he had left to take. The people from church were the best thing about his present life, but he didn't want to test their generosity by asking for much else than they were already doing. Mrs. Carter's chicken soup was keeping him alive and somewhat healthy. Henry came over now and again, and his presence lightened his load immeasurably. Then there was the trip to Nashville, just to hang out in a bar. He wondered what possessed him to move into a dry county. It would have been nice to walk to a bar, buy a drink, and walk back. If he'd stayed local, he wouldn't have met Marjorie. He couldn't forget the expression on her face when his prosthesis came off in her hand. He couldn't understand the subsequent reaction of screaming, vomiting, and then curling into a fetal position in a corner. He hadn't seen such a reaction to anything since he came back home from the war. His heart went out to her. It took all the charm he could muster to calm her down enough for speech, and about an hour to get her mentally together enough to feel safe about leaving her alone and going home. He told her about his cancer and his problems with chemotherapy. She was a nurse and understood. She said she could help him, so he gave her his phone number. He had his address in this town for 25 years, but he still didn't know anybody in town well enough to trust over marijuana. Somehow, though, he felt he could trust Marjorie. The phone rang. Slackmeyer Residence. This is Sears Delivery Service. Are you going to be home for the next couple of hours? I'm not going anywhere for a long time. We are bringing the washer you ordered. Great. Be there in an hour or so. Yeah, great, he muttered to himself after he hung up the phone. I have to leave the couch and go downstairs and unlock the outside door, and then I have to deal with the delivery people. Shit. I have to get dressed. His robe was soaked through at the armpits when he got to the top of the stairs. He took a side trip to the bathroom to vomit again and to drink some more water. He turned on the shower, took off his robe and Miranda's panties, and stepped into the shower. The hot water coursing over his body felt good. As he washed himself, he thought about the times he had bathed his children when they were young. They got along so well together when they were little. Those were the happiest moments of his life, and it was only now, with them alienated from him and each other, and scattered to God knows where, did he appreciate those times. Now, he shared architecture with the girls instead of his son. How ironic. After a couple of months, he could not bring himself to touch the changed anatomy any more than what was necessary to install his prosthesis. It was like touching it would make the change more permanent than it was. The prosthesis. What a disappointment that was. Because of the haste of his surgery and the amount of tissue the doctors finally had to remove, and the length of time under anesthesia, they never took casts of his genitals. They assumed that he was circumcised. The flesh tone matched, but the prosthesis was very uncomfortable if worn for long periods of time. The tube up his urethra behaved like a foreign object and caused soreness after a couple of hours. It was just like having a bad prostate when he had to urinate, because it had a valve that only opened under pressure, so he had to force urine out through it by bearing down on his bladder like he had to do when his prostate swelled up. It also didn't feel real when he fished in his pants to pull it out to urinate. It had the right texture, but it didn't feel like part of him. Then there was the scene in the motel room. The damned thing seemed to be more trouble than it was worth. Then there was the matter of sex. Supposedly, the thing could be made erect by squeezing on the attachment point inside his vagina in a rhythmic pumping motion, and it would rise to the occasion. They insisted that it wouldn't require many pumps. He experimented a couple of times, and the first time it ended up hanging on by the tube and flopping against his leg as it was expelled, and the second time he was stopped by cramping. Then there was the matter of finding a willing woman. After all, for all intents and purposes, he would be sodomizing her with a piece of space-age plastic. Who would want that? How could he, in that maimed condition, keep a woman happy and faithful? How could he ask that of a woman? He dried himself off, got a fresh pair of panties from Miranda's dresser, and pulled on some blue jeans. He walked by the mirror and decided that he was no longer the right shape for them. The slight augmentation that the surgeons made, combined with the weight loss, no testosterone, water retention from the removal of several lymph nodes, and the chemotherapy gave him the image of a girl in her late teens. In blue jeans, his legs looked just like Miranda's. On her, they were great. On him, they were just plain scary. He put on a pair of Dockers instead. He looked at his prosthesis on the nightstand and decided that it was too much trouble to deal with. He was still sore from having the tube pulled out too fast the other night in Nashville. He finished dressing and went downstairs. The journey and activity totally exhausted him. He turned on the television and drifted off to sleep. 29 seemed to be